Are you ready for Season 2 of Discography? I'm your host, Mark with a C, and Discography is a show where we look at a great artist through the lens of only their canon albums of first release material to see who they really are and how it all stacks up. And you should know that for Season 2, we will be discussing the albums by the one, the only Janet Jackson. Singer, songwriter, dancer, actress, a household name, one of the biggest stars the Western world has ever known, and though she sold over 100 million records worldwide, few have really poured through her canonical albums to see how they stack up. From her unsung early recordings to the genre-defining albums Rhythm Nation and Velvet Rope, all the way to 2015's Unbreakable, we're taking the deepest dive into Janet Jackson's studio records one can possibly imagine. Season 2 of Discography premieres on July 17th, 2018, only on Consequence Podcast Network.
Consequence Podcast Network.
Hey, welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith With. It's an audio interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. Wherever you're listening from today, hit the subscribe button so you can keep up with these. Love to have you along, and then you can give a rating and leave a review as well. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today my guest is Michael Alago. This is a legendary A&R man. He just had a documentary made about him that you can see on Netflix called Who the Fuck Is That Guy? We talk about his early days with the Dead Boys and the Misfits, staging a legendary show with Johnny Rotten's Public Image Limited, the discovery of Metallica, as well as working with Cyndi Lauper and Tracy Chapman, and how he's planning on following up the documentary with a brand new book of stories that we have not yet heard yet. But you gotta check out the stories in this one first. It's Kyle Meredith with Michael Alago.
Oh, hey, Kyle, it's Michael Alago.
How are you, Michael?
Oh, pretty good. Why not?
Yeah, it is a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for the call today.
What's happening?
It's a pretty good overcast day in Louisville, Kentucky, so...
Oh, wait, that's where you are?
I'm in Louisville, yeah.
Oh, my God, I haven't been there in 100 years. I guess the last time I was there... Oh, gosh. Well, it was a few times. But I used to love a band from Louisville called...
King Horse?
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm so glad your mind works better than mine.
Well,
yes, I loved King Horse, and I loved Sean, and they were killer.
So I literally, about 20 minutes ago, just finished the movie, Who the Fuck Is That Guy, on Netflix. So... It's so well done. I mean, it's so well done, and the story it tells in 90 minutes is incredible. So someone approached you about doing this movie, right?
Yes, there's a small company in New York City called Stone Films NYC, and the ringleader of that is a gentleman named Drew Stone. He had made two other movies, mostly about hardcore punk rock, and we actually met in 1997 when I had signed the Misfits to Geffen, and he was managing a little band called Sub-Zero, who I loved. And so he called Jerry Only from the Misfits and said, can we come on the road with you to Spain? And Jerry said yes. So we all wound up going to Spain. All I remember is a lot of drinking and a lot of fighting. I was doing both of those things. Fast forward, Drew and I really hadn't seen each other since the late 90s. And he called me out of the blue and said, I've been following your life and everything going on with you, and you have an interesting life, and let's talk about making a movie. So at first I felt hesitant, and then my ego took over, and I thought, well, this is a person who loves music as much as I loved music, and maybe he'll do a good job. So we had lots of meetings and lots of talks, and he just started putting the movie together. I gathered the talent, and there you go.
Yeah. Well, it is an incredible story. And, I'll go back to the, close to the beginning of it, because while you do find yourself in these, clubs and go into shows, it seems like your professional life kind of starts with the Dead Boys. Is that right?
Oh, you could say that. Yeah, sure. I was a young 15-year-old going to CBGB. My friend Jody Ribello and I saw the Dead Boys. We lost our minds. we took pictures, lots of pictures of them, and we thought, oh, we're going to start a fan club. But, I don't know, like we were 15 years old. I don't know about really being focused or anything. So we did put out one zine, Xerox zine, and that was really it. But, we loved the Dead Boys, and we saw them every time they came to New York or wherever we wound up traveling with them. And, I wound up seeing them in New York, L.A., San Francisco. So I guess in some little way, my professional life may have started there.
Yeah, but still, 15 years old, 16 years old, here you are mixing around. They're not all exactly rock stars yet. I mean, everybody's kind of getting their fix, but, some of them had to be budding at that point. And I'm thinking back, like, we all had those dreams, but being, me growing up in rural Kentucky, not really having the means to do it, or at least, I didn't have the lifestyle of I'm going to run away from home or do anything like this, so much the guts. But I think my head would have exploded if I'd even, been in any of that, been privy to any of those, conversations. I mean, were you aware that this was a lifestyle sort of extra special from the beginning?
Yes. I think I came out of the womb loving music. At some point, I knew in my teenage years that I had no plan B. My plan A was I was going to be in the music business. I had no idea as a young teenager what that actually meant. But, I talk about this a lot, that I watched a lot of music shows on TV. I watched Dick Clark's American Bandstand. I watched Don Cornelius' Soul Train. I watched Don Kirshner's In Concert. And all of that music, that variety of music, coupled with AM radio, because AM radio in the late 70s didn't have a format like we have now. Mm-hmm. They played rock, they played soul, they played pop. So all of that stuff informed my listening. So I got a degree in hearing lots of different styles of music. So at some point, when I said I'm going to be in the music business, that actually happened one day in 1980. When I was working at a little pharmacy on Astor Place in the East Village. I was taking a walk one day, and I saw a beautiful Art Deco building in the East Village on 11th Street, and there was a sign on the door that said they were going to be opening some kind of video club. And I walked in, and I saw how beautiful the venue was, and there was a man in the balcony, and he said, "Kid, you know what? We're not open." I said, "But I want a job here." He kind of laughed and said, "Well, do you have a resume?" And I said, "I do not have a resume. I go to school, and I work in a pharmacy." Well, his name is Jerry Brandt, and he was an entrepreneur in the, the 60s. And he worked at the William Morris Agency. He managed and discovered Joe Bryant, Carly Simon, the Voices of East Harlem. He worked with the Rolling Stones back in the day and Sam Cooke. And he called me up into his office that afternoon. We start talking about music, and he took a liking to me. And he said, "You know what? I'm going to give you a job." And he gave me a job. I had to answer his phone. I had to go get his lunch, and I had to open his mail. And that thrilled me. That made me feel I was in the music business. So I was like a sponge. I picked up everything, and I listened to all his conversations, and at some point I was booking the room there. I was the assistant booking director there, and it was marvelous. I learned so much. I learned how to speak to booking agents and figure out how to book a room that held approximately 1,500 seats. And then from there, when I felt like I wanted to explore some more, I got a job at Elektra Records. I had that same conversation with the chairman of Elektra, Bob Krasnow, that I had with Jerry about music. But Jerry was very generous and said, "You know, I don't want to lose you, but I know Bob Krasnow, and I will call him for you." And I was friends with Bob's son, Mitchell, and Mitchell said, "I will tell my dad about you." So Bob was hearing from family and colleagues about me, and he gave me a job.
Well, before we jump to Electra, I did want to jump back to the Ritz.
Please.
There for a second, because, here we've got a historic room, which, these days we know as Webster. But you were part of making that even more historic in 1981 with Pill, Public Image LTD, and Johnny Rotten. Now, this is a very famous show, but I would love to hear your own accounts of the situation and the aftermath.
Well, I will try to be as succinct as possible. It's not always easy. That weekend, I believe May 15 and 16, 1981, we have Bow Wow Wow booked. It is completely sold out. At some point, I hear from Malcolm McLaren letting me know that they were not coming over. And I thought, okay, why are you not coming over? He said, well, Annabella is underage, and her mom won't let her go overseas. I said, we'll buy an effing ticket for her mother. You better just get on the plane. We sent you the 50% deposit, and we expect you here this weekend. He said he would get back to me. So I know in a day or so, that's that week, when I didn't hear back from him, I called him. And he said, yeah, we're not coming. And I was furious. Jerry was furious. And I had to think quick. I have no idea that I could think that quick, but I had heard that John, Keith Levine, and Jeanette, who were then Public Image Limited, were in New York. They were in Liz Rosenberg's office at Warner Brothers on a press junket for Flowers of Romance. I do not actually know John at that point in time, but I call, and, I've never had a problem calling people and saying, hey, this is Michael Alago, and this is what I do. So that's what I did. And we sent a car for them, brought them down to our day office during the day, and we had this meeting. They said, well, we're not rehearsed. We have no music. We have nothing. So I said, well, Keith, let's get you a synthesizer. I think it was a Prophet 5 that we could program 40 minutes or so worth of music in, and let's just do it. Now, everybody who then found out about it, because I had to call WLIR in Long Island, and I spoke to Larry the Duck, and I said, this is what's happening. We want to put some ads on the air. Bow Wow Wow is canceling, and Pill are filling in. Well, everyone went berserk. That show completely sold out for 2 nights. And to get back to that meeting during the day, they wanted to play. We had this huge white screen. It was like a $20,000 screen. They wanted to play behind the screen. They wanted it to be performance art. They wanted all of those white lights to be shining up so that they were black silhouettes on the screen. I thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. And but nobody else thought it was fantastic. Everybody coming there, wanted to see Pill. They wanted to see Johnny Rotten, not John Lydon, same person. And after that 18 minutes, chairs, bottles started flying because John, as only John can do, taunted the audience, letting them know they were not coming out from behind the screen. So literally, as they say, all hell broke loose. It was crazy. It was crazy. And remember, at that point in time when they were like punk rock type shows, security didn't know how to really deal with young people. But, we had to close down the venue. And, I don't know, I went backstage, and John and I and friends were laughing, not laughing, worried, not worried, drinking and more drinking. And my boss, Jerry, was furious with me. But, of course, I wanted to bring them back the next day. And we did not bring them back the next day. I think we had some kind of boring video night. But, it's a historic show. That night on the 11 o'clock news, every local station talked about that. Tim Summer, a fabulous journalist, young journalist back then, was working for, I believe, Sounds in the UK. And that was his next cover story. The same thing with New Musical Express and the NME. It was the cover story. It was the shot heard around the world within the next 24 hours, that show. And, to this day, people still ask me about it. And it was fabulous. It was crazy. It was an experiment that didn't work, but I loved every waking moment of it.
Yeah. Now, not a lot of people, get a personal relationship with John Lydon. there's not a lot that Johnny Rotten lets into his inner circle. What's your relationship with him been like? After that because
Sure.
the stories of Johnny Rotten are legendary in themselves as a sometimes difficult person, but you don't seem to have had that experience.
Yeah. No, I was blessed. We liked each other, I believe, from the beginning. At some point, I got him signed to Elektra. We made this album called Album. It was with Ginger Baker and all these great studio musicians. Bill Laswell from Material produced the album. It did okay. Didn't do what we thought it was going to do. At that same time period, I picked up This Is What You Want, This Is What You Get, and Live in Tokyo. They were both Virgin records that Virgin never bothered to put out in the States. So we put them out at Elektra in the United States and Canada. It was a very expensive deal. We wound up having to drop him the next year because it was just too expensive to keep him. But to answer your question, I don't know. We never had a bad word with each other. Even when I dropped him, he always taunts and teases me. It's like, yes, you dropped me because all you cared about was Metallica. And that's so not true. But he loves to give me the dig all the time. It is a blessing. And I don't know how this happened, but we have been friends now 38 years, and we have never had a bad word with each other. I completely adore John. He is brilliant. He is funny. And, all those stories you hear about him walking off of interviews and stuff, it's when journalists all they want to do is talk about the Sex Pistols, or they ask him, just ridiculous questions that he has no time for. But he is an extraordinary artist. I will love him and respect him forever. And like I said, he's in my documentary. He has a documentary coming out called The Public Image is Rotten, and I'm in his documentary. And it's just one of those things that worked out beautifully.
Well, you mentioned Metallica, and it is interesting. On one side you have your relationship with John Lydon. On the other side, here you are, you're discovering Metallica. Was there a defined or a dividing line between punk and metal as much as it seems now back then?
I guess prior to us knowing that there were some kind of crossover bands that meshed punk and metal, I think it was a separate thing. I think the attitude was different. At some point, a lot of those bands blended together.
Like I said, in the history books, it's like I don't know, the Greasers versus whatever that was, the mods and everything,
right.
Or something like that. It seemed like it would have been, the dividing line with stones being thrown the whole time. But here you are, going, no, this is all great. I like all of this, and you hear Metallica, coming from a punk world, sort of. You heard Metallica, and you heard, this works.
Right, but let me remind you, like I said, from a very early age, I was privileged to hear lots of different kinds of music, and I loved lots of different kinds of music. And for me, I knew at an early age that I loved heavy music. And for me, the louder, the noisier, the more different noise that I could hear, I kind of fell in love with. So when I heard Metallica and they were blending punk and metal, American metal, British metal, speed, all these different things that didn't sound like anybody else, I just kind of knew, wow, these guys are awesome. And then once I saw them live, I saw how charismatic they all were, and I thought, these are people that are going to be huge, and I want them on Elektra Records. And through a series of negotiations that wound up happening, summer of '84, and here we are 35 years later talking about them, and they're still out there playing stadiums and doing their thing. And it's so wonderful.
Still one of the biggest bands in the world. I mean, you're talking about their breadth of artists and everything, and it seems like the common thread with the artists that, whose career you've been a part of is they're all rebels in some way. And I'll still even use the word punks in some way. Metallica is that way. Tracy Chapman, who you ended up with, is a rebellious spirit. Nina Simone is 100% a rebellious spirit. I mean, these are as punk as you can get with these artists, I guess, right?
Well, I always wanted to be involved with people that had a point of view. I never wanted to be involved with anyone who seemed homogenized, because for me, homogenized equals boring. I needed that rebellious spirit. I needed that fuel to fire me up to want to sign them and work with them. And, you know, whether it's working with somebody like Cyndi Lauper or working with John Lydon, you know, they all have that spirit. And I was just blessed to recognize that in them. And I was thrilled to be a part of their working professional lives. And sometimes with some of these artists like a Cyndi and a John and a James Hetfield and Lars, we still talk, we still see each other, I still attend their shows. This year, John is playing in New York again on my birthday, again, October 13th, but he's in the tri-state area for about 3 shows, and yes, I will attend all 3 shows, and you know, I still get the greatest thrill out of seeing him and hearing the music.
I did want to, you know, kind of wrap up the decade talk, because you were an A&R man in the 80s.
Yes.
And that's a mythical job in a mythical time. It is. Yeah. Did the alt rock sea change of the 90s affect, you know, your job that much? Because you ended up with Geffen and everything, which were, you know, they were on the cutting edge of alternative rock at the time.
Well, you know, Geffen, you know, I felt like I was very blessed to work both at Geffen and Elektra, and I worked at both labels twice. Now, over at Geffen, they were as adventurous as Elektra was. And I feel like both those labels were major labels distributed through major corporations, but they treated the roster like as if it was a boutique label. Geffen had a more wildly diverse, I would say, roster, from Beck and Sonic Youth to Cher and Whitesnake and White Zombie and Guns N' Roses and Elektra. You know, we had everybody from Anita Baker to The Cure to Metallica. So I don't think, you know, the 90s changed my job at all, because I felt like in the 80s and the 90s, I was still signing all the stuff that I wanted to sign. It was when people were still buying records, and it was incredible. You know, one of the reasons I stopped after 24 years was around 2004, I'd say, when all the Tower Records closed, when all the Virgin megastores closed, when Lars was having his thing with Napster. I just felt like, wow, everything is changing. And I was grateful that I could be a part of an A&R system that was, you could go out, see bands every night, and artist development was still something. You know, these days there is no artist development. I think A&R people are scared to sign things for fear of losing losing their job. You know, I think a lot of A&R people, and I know a lot of A&R people, you know, they watch things on YouTube and they think that's the way of the world. That's a two-dimensional thing. You're looking at a screen. You don't know if that artist is truly charismatic or not. You know, it's like there's a band that I'm getting signed right now called Ether. They're from South Florida. They're all doom and gloom and very heavy. I sent their record to about they made their own independent record called There Is Nothing Left for Me Here. I sent it to 10 labels that I thought, wow, Napalm will like it, Nuclear Blast will like it, Century Media will like it, Metal Blade would like it, and so on. The response I got from A&R people were from, I wish I could get excited about new bands, to, bro, their numbers are terrible. And me being not a spring chicken, thinking their numbers are terrible, their numbers are terrible. Oh, you mean Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, those numbers? Well, I called up 2 of those A&R people, and I said, listen, it's your job as an A&R person to get those numbers where you would like them. All these, you know, young artists, they're doing their DIY, do-it-yourself thing, and if they're out on the road, they're doing the best that they can, but sometimes those numbers don't equal what you think they should equal. So it's a very different music business. It's a very different A&R world, and I'm so glad that I did A&R during those years that I did it.
Now, do you find yourself with any of your former, you know, bands and everything, sort of armchair quarterbacking? Do you ever give them a call being like, oh, I don't know if you should do that, or giving them encouragement on stuff?
Oh, I like to be encouraging when they ask. Not a lot of people ask these days because a lot of the artists that I have worked with have been working for years. I guess at one point we could backtrack a little bit to I stopped working officially at companies in 2004, and I started taking photographs and putting out books. But in 2009, Cyndi Lauper called, and she's always been an adventurous spirit, and she said, Michael, I want to make a dance record. Can you help me? Absolutely. So I helped her. I A&R'd a record called Bring You to the Brink. Mm-hmm. And then in 2010, she called back and she said, I like working with you, and I want to make a blues record. Have you ever made a blues record? I said, no, Sin, I've never made a blues record. Have you? She said, no. I said, good, we're on even ground. Well, we wound up making a fabulous, fabulous blues record.
It was a great one.
Tons of research. I helped find her a great producer. We went down to Memphis. We had people from Isaac Hayes' band, people from Al Green's band. We had Johnny Lang playing guitar. We had Ann Peebles, who sang I Can't Stand the Rain back in the day on the record. I mean, we had the creme de la creme for this album. And the hard work paid off when we found out that it was up for a Grammy for Best Contemporary Blues Album. Now, it didn't win, but you know what? That acknowledgement went a long way with us because we really worked hard and people heard that. So I guess when you say encouragement, that encouragement came by, say, Cyndi asking me those 2 times to work with her. I said yes, and we really did extraordinary work together.
I like that record. I saw that tour, too, and I had her, I interviewed her for the first time earlier this year with Rod Stewart, and she's one of my favorite people I've ever had on the phone because she just owned it.
Isn't she too much?
No, I didn't have to, all the work that I had planned just sort of went out the window because she just owned that interview, and I thought this is the most fun I've had on the phone, you know, all year.
Well, isn't that great? Well, she's a very special human being. She's an incredible artist. She has never let up in the 30-odd years that she's been making records and going on the road, and whether, you know, she's doing headliner tours or whether she's opening for Tina Turner or Cher and co-headlining now, I guess, on the second half of the Rod Stewart tour. Mm-hmm. She's out there.
Yeah, man.
And she's better than ever.
Yep, I completely agree. Michael, I thank you for your time today. You have so much important history inside you, and I'm just grateful that you were a part of it and made it all happen.
Oh, well, thank you. And, you know, all the stuff that we couldn't put in the film will be in a book that I'm working on. I got a book deal. So I have a book coming out, hopefully second quarter of 2019. So all these cool backstage stories, whether it's about the making of Cyndi's record and how part of the civil rights movement played into making the record, or when Bill Graham took me down to Jacksonville, Florida to see Lynyrd Skynyrd, who were labelless at this point in time in 1990. So all of these things that didn't fit in the movie, I'm going to put in a book.
Oh, fantastic.
And so far, the book tentatively is called I Am Michael Alago, Breathing Music, Signing Metallica, and Surviving the AIDS Crisis. Now, if you don't get what's going on in this book with that title, I don't know what to tell you, but it covers a broad range of things, and it's just a continuation of my life and surviving, and here we are talking today, and it's a wonderful thing.
I look forward to that book. I can't wait to read those stories, and hopefully we can talk again once that's out.
Oh, Kyle, I would love that. So, yes, we will stay in touch.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, that's Michael Alago. Thanks so much for that call right there. That's a documentary that's currently out. You can see it on Netflix. It's called Who the Fuck Is That Guy? Looking forward to the new book as well. Hey, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you're over at YouTube, you'll be able to keep up with your favorite interviews. If you're checking out the podcast, whether you're at iTunes, Podchaser, or wherever you're getting this from, subscribe there as well. Then leave a rating and a review. Then you can head over to WFPK.org. That's where I do a show every Monday through Thursday from noon to 3 Eastern, where you'll also find some bonus episodes of this series over there as well. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.